people began to move into Ash Springs. It wasn't about as far north as the mill pond, about 2 or 3 miles far, I would think. And then it went south, I don't know, it probably went way down. It wouldn't go far as Sabine or 968, I don't think. Probably kind of down end of Stevens Road somewhere there. And east, it probably went kind of like the Monts cut off if you're going down Highway 80, somewhere along Sand Hill there. Now west, I don't know, it probably went over to probably the other side of where 450 comes through Hallsville. In other words, it's a pretty big area. They had only stores around there. Whitehorn had his store, and Dr. Smith had his. And these men, I know Whitehorn did. He went to New Orleans to buy goods at times, and he could have them shipped. They could come up to Jefferson. Jefferson was a port then, you know. That's when the river, you could float down the river. They had a steamboat down it, and he'd bring it by wagon from Jefferson to his store. He'd cut through there, from Jefferson to Ash Springs, and they had a settlement. And this went on from the middle 1840s all through the Civil War and till 1869. And now I want to tell you about the Civil War. The people that lived at Ash Springs, some of them I know that were in it. John Whitehorn was too old, but Thomas Sanders, he was in Company 10. Dr. Smith went to the war. He went with Colonel Culbertson. He was down at Galveston. He was guarding the coast. He was working with the Navy. He was a sergeant, and he was down there. But I didn't tell you this, but his wife was Louisa Rux Jackson. She was a first cousin of General Thomas Stonewall Jackson. He was a very famous and outstanding Civil War general. In fact, he won numerous battles early on with the Civil War, and he was probably their best fighting general. And Dr. Smith here in Hallsville was married to his first cousin. Well, if you know history, Stonewall Jackson got shot by his own men in the wilderness. He was wounded. And Dr. Smith was up there, and he attended him. I know there were other. I've been to the actual house in Richmond, Virginia, where Stonewall spent his last days, and they had another doctor come in there too. Also helped, probably maybe knew more about it. But Dr. Smith was up there. He attended him, and he was in a Virginia unit up there, and he helped attend him. Of course, he made it through the Civil War. Smith did. He came back through Arkansas. He helped doctor some people there, some soldiers that was injured. He helped nurse them back to health. During the time after the Civil War, his wife, Louisa Rux Jackson, died. She's buried somewhere on the property, his property. It was McGrill property for a long time. Actually, the McGrill heir is still on it. I think they have 5 gas wells on it now. Some of Louise and Miss Summers was McGrill. She's buried there, but her grave, we don't know where it is, and we don't know, never have found out what year she died. But Dr. Smith had several children, and of course he was looking for a wife. And well, his business partner was Brother Farrell. Brother Farrell was teaching in Ash Springs School some. He was a preacher at the Baptist Church, and he was in business, in the Mercantile business, with Dr. Smith in his store. But he had this daughter, and Of course, while he was teaching at Ash Springs, she taught there some early. Her name was Selina Farrell. She was born in 1839. She was young. She got her job down across the Sabine. It was called Camden. It's where the community of Easton is. You hear about Easton, it's over off of 149. But it was called Camden in the early days. It was a thriving community on the south side of the Sabine River. She got a job teaching in Easton school, teaching school. And she lived in Ash Springs, and she would ride a horse from Ash Springs all the way to Camden. She'd go come in. There wasn't no Hallsville, but it's what Hallsville is now, and she'd head south, I guess down Talley Road, go down that way. I guess she probably would be Quail Lane now. And she would ride all the way to the river, and there was a crossing. There was a ferry. They had a ferry. And she rode through an area that they had runaway slaves there. They had rough characters all. And she carried a pistol with her. She told my mother's aunt that she did an interview. I've got writing on this, is in history. But she carried a pistol in her hand, and she was ready to, in case she didn't bother her. She would leave on Friday evening. She'd ride down. She'd take this ferry across the Sabine. She'd teach school. She had a room and board with somebody over in Camden, and she'd teach school. And she did this for several years during and after the Civil War. Well, Dr. Smith began looking for a wife, and she was younger, but she was looking for a husband. He married her, and before Hallsville settled in March of '79. And she taught school before she had her first children. She quit teaching when she married, but I think she taught probably a year after she was married. It looks that way. A lot of records show that she taught school in a small school over on Cypress Street. It's right on Cypress. There was a road that came from Ash Springs down through to what is Clark Drive. It came down through there, and Johnny Manuel, a long-time Hallsville man, he said that was the main road. I don't think it was, but I know there was a road there. It came all the way down Clark Drive and came over to Locust Street, crossed 450, and then went up to Locust Street. But she taught school on a little area, small school room on the north part of Cypress Street. And I don't know this, but I think she probably taught school kind of in the transition period when the Hallsville first school, where they were building the lodge. I'm getting ahead of myself, but I got to tell her story anyway. I think she taught school probably there for a year, maybe in 1869, 1870. Anyway, she married Dr. Smith. She was married to him, and she became his wife, and she did a lot of, she was a preacher's daughter, and she had everybody, and she had a number. Her daughter was my grandmother, Libby Brown. She was a Brown, and her daughter taught school in Woodlawn. And my mother taught school in Hallsville. She taught school in Hallsville for 33 years. And my aunt, Ms. Elizabeth Haggard, and both of my sisters, Ann Newell and Carol Greeley, just retired after 50 years of working for the Hallsville school system. And she has a daughter named Gay Greer that taught school. So all of those taught school. I didn't teach school. I guess I'm the black sheep, but I didn't teach school. I worked for the Forest Service. So anyway, Ash Springs was beginning to really have a good little community, and something started coming in for the east. And this was the railroad. The railroad had been going on during this time. As far early as 1858, the railroad came out to Swanson Landing on Caddo Lake. They could have shipped stuff through that part then. Apparently it was deep enough to use, and it ran from Shreveport, and then it ran from Marshall, 23 miles from Swanson Landing into Marshall. And had a train station. That was the first in Harrison County. And during the Civil War, there was a Colonel Magruder. He took up the track between Swanson Landing and Marshall because he wanted to run it from Wascom, so it come from Shreveport, and they could ship goods. They didn't know if there was going to be a lot of fighting around Marshall and all. And like I told you, there never was any fighting in Harrison County. We got out of it. They fought down in Louisiana, not very far over in there, Red River Campaign. And another man in Hallsville that played a part in Ash Springs, he fought in that war. His name was B.R. Bass. He was the great-grandfather of the Parkers and also the Hunts. Jimmy Hunt, Bobby Hunt, all the Hunts, their kin. He's their kin, B.R. Bass. He owned across Hickey Road. He owned land there. He had an orchard. He had a cotton gin. And he was across from Dr. Smith's land. He owned across on the east side of Hickey Road down to the old Highway 80, probably, all that area in there. He fought in the Civil War there in 1864 so there were several people that fought in the Civil War. Okay, we've told you about Ash Springs. We told you about Fort Crawford. Now let's talk a little bit about Hallsville. We're up to the year 1869. The railroad is in Marshall, and it's broke. It doesn't have any money. And they get hold of a syndicate in Louisville, Kentucky, named the Hall Syndicate. The main men in it are Elijah Hall and Volney Hall, his son. And they buy into the Southern Pacific Railroad. Actually, they buy the interest in it. And they've run railroad before, and they've got a lot of money. They got enough to get it going. And the track is laid from Marshall to Hallsville, or maybe the other side of Marshall, everywhere it was. And this is a stopping point. And all of a sudden, this is the railhead. This is the end of the track. And here, they named the town after probably more Volney Hall, both of them the Hall. And they named it Hallville, Hallville. It doesn't have an S to it. The S was not added till, I've recently learned that they're saying that it wasn't added till 1820. 1820, the early 20s by the post office. So many people called it, added S when they called it, so they probably just changed it. But anyway, this railroad came in here. They came and everything started jumping. People started bringing cotton. They started bringing produce, everything from west. Far west is Dallas and Sulphur Springs, and everywhere they were coming in here. And they were just bringing stuff to get shipped back east on the train. They built the railroad. They built a turnaround. They also built some shops. They built some railroad shops, and this employed a lot of people. They the TNP, or not TNP, Southern Pacific shops were here. They were built on the east side of downtown, probably from Cypress Street back west, right in that area there. The shops were there. and the turnaround was probably kind of right in that general area too, maybe the east side of Cypress Street. They had a lot of people employed there. They had a lot of hotels went in. People were coming into town to catch the train. They had to have a place to stay. They put up several hotels. They put up numerous grocery stores and different mercantile stores. They tell me they had 19 saloons between Cypress Street and where the cemetery is. The town just grew overnight. This was in August 17th, the first train come in, and Volley Hall started selling lots. He started selling them to the people. The town was formed. Ice Spring, people in Ice Springs who lived in, some of them in Fort Crawford, they moved in. They started moving in. A group got together. They moved the lodge in. They met. And they decided they would have to build a lodge. Dr. Smith and different ones formed the lodge, and they picked an area on the hill, what is now Church Street, where the present day Masonic Lodge. It's always been there ever since 1870, I guess, when they started. And they built a lodge building, and it was completed in 1871. The school went in on the bottom floor, and the Masons met on the second floor. And by the way, this school was under the Masons. They stayed there till 1914. But they got this built, and they built the Baptist church. It was downtown, just north of the present sanctuary at first, but I was only there less than a year, and they built a church over what people are known as Cullen Pond. It was actually it was in front of the old white high school on Green Street. Said right on Green Street, years ago where the old bus barn would be. It was on Green Street across from the where the administration building just moved out of. It was kind of in that area there. It had a Baptist church. The Church of Christ was up on Church Street. It's about where a lot I used to own that James Greer built a building. Church of Christ was there. And the Methodists still stayed out at Fort Crawford. They stayed out there till 1880. Hallsville began to grow, and they had, right overnight, they had nearly 3,000 people lived here. So it'd be years and years before they had that many. But Marshall didn't like it. They didn't want to see Hallsville. They had been voted the county seat. They were a bigger city. Some way they got with the county, and they formed a bond issue. And they got passed a bond issue. They got money together. They offered the railroad 66 acres if they'd move the shops to Marshall. And they got them to move them, and they moved the shops over there. By the way, they had built a locomotive here. They had built a number of different cars, rail cars. They had done a good bit of work in the 2 years in 1869, 1870, and early 71. But the latter part of 1871, the shops moved, and about the same time, the railroad was extended. It extended to Longview by late 71 or 72. So all of a sudden, Hallsville just turned into a sleepy little farming town, and that's where it remained for a long time. And the cotton was king, and they still had the school at the Masonic Lodge, and had a terrible fire in 1905, and it burned much of the western part of town, north and western. It burned the lodge, burned the school, and they had to have school in them. I think they had it in the Church of Christ, which was kind of next door. Part of it met there, and other places. They built a new lodge. It burned in March of 1878, and they built a new one. The cornerstone was set in 1879. And they built this lodge, and it stayed there till 1970. But that's where they had the school, and the town started to grow. And in 1914, Superintendent Bowles, D.C. Bowles, B-O-W-L-E-S, he worked long and hard with Mr. Haywood, the bank. A bank had been formed in 1909, and he worked long and hard with that and came up with the money to build a new school. And things kind of began to take off from there, and we'll talk about that later.